The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, when Marguerite walked in with that expression I'd come to know too well, the one that said she'd already made up her mind about something that would change everything. "Stephen, we need to talk," she said, setting the manila envelope on our granite countertop like it contained nuclear launch codes. 23 years of marriage teaches you to read the signs. The way she'd been staying late at the office, the new clothes, the expensive perfume, the sudden interest in yoga classes that somehow never seemed to involve actual yoga. Leonard Crane's name dropping into conversations with increasing frequency, always followed by that little smile that used to be reserved for me. "Let me guess," I said, setting down my mug with deliberate calm. "Leonard thinks you deserve better." Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "This isn't about Leonard. This is about me, about what I need. And what you need is freedom." I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. "Liberation, as you called it last week. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Stephen. We can do this civilly. I've already spoken to my attorney. We can split everything fairly, and you can keep the house if you want it." I almost laughed. The house I'd renovated with my own hands, room by room, thinking we were building something permanent. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was offering to let me keep the symbol of everything she was abandoning. "How generous," I said. "And I suppose Leonard's promised you a bright future at Crane & Associates?" "He's offered me a partnership track, senior vice president of operations. It's everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for." I repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitterness. "And all it cost was our marriage." She straightened, adopting that corporate posture I'd seen her practice in the mirror. "I won't apologize for wanting more from my life. You've been content to coast for years, Stephen. Your little accounting practice, your weekend golf games, your comfortable routine. Some of us want to actually achieve something." The dismissal in her voice cut deeper than I'd expected. My little accounting practice had supported us both through her MBA program, had paid for this house, had funded her designer wardrobe and luxury car. But apparently, stability wasn't enough anymore. "Fine," I said, surprising her with my calm acceptance. "I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." She blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. "Just like that?" "Just like that. If freedom is what you want, Marguerite, then freedom is what you'll get." The relief on her face was almost insulting. "Thank you, Stephen. I know this is difficult, but I think we'll both be happier this way." I nodded and opened the envelope, scanning the legal documents inside. Standard divorce papers, property division agreements, spousal support waivers. Everything neat and tidy, just like Leonard probably preferred his business dealings. "I'll need a few days to review these with my attorney," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But she was already moving toward the door, car keys jingling in her hand. Another late night at the office, no doubt. More strategic planning sessions with her future business partner. After she left, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the silence of a house that suddenly felt too big. The morning sun streamed through windows I'd installed myself, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts of better times. I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney, Jim Morrison, not the rock star, as he liked to joke, just a guy who'd helped me navigate contracts and business deals for the past decade. "Jim, it's Stephen Ashford. I need to see you today if possible. Marguerite's filed for divorce." "I'm sorry to hear that, Stephen. Can you be here at 2? "I'll be there." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of mundane tasks that felt surreal under the circumstances. I showered, dressed in my best suit, the navy one Marguerite had picked out for me 3 Christmases ago, and tried to process the fact that my marriage was officially over. Jim's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and leather-bound legal volumes. He'd been practicing law in our small lakeside town for 30 years, handling everything from real estate closings to the occasional criminal defense case. "Let me take a look at these," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he spread the divorce papers across his desk. I watched him read, noting the way his eyebrows gradually climbed higher on his forehead. "Well," he said finally, "she's certainly being generous. No alimony request, 50-50 split on assets. She keeps her car and her retirement accounts. You keep the house and yours. Very clean. Very straightforward." "Too straightforward?" "Maybe. In my experience, when someone's this eager to wrap things up quickly, there's usually a reason." He leaned back in his chair, studying me over his glasses. "You mentioned she's been working late a lot. Any chance there's someone else in the picture?" "Her boss, Leonard Crane. They've been spending a lot of time together on what she calls strategic initiatives." Jim nodded slowly. "Leonard Crane. Runs that big insurance brokerage downtown?" "That's him. Apparently he's offered her a partnership." "Interesting timing." Jim made a note on his legal pad. "Stephen, I want you to think carefully about this. Are you absolutely certain you want to agree to these terms? Once we sign off, there's no going back." I considered the question seriously. Part of me wanted to fight, to make her justify her decision, to force her to confront the reality of what she was throwing away. But a larger part of me was simply tired. Tired of pretending not to notice her late nights and secret phone calls. Tired of competing with Leonard Crane's promises of corporate success and financial freedom. "Yes," I said finally. "Let's get this over with." "All right then. I'll file the response, and we should have this wrapped up within 60 days, assuming no complications." I shook his hand and walked back to my car, feeling like I'd just signed my own obituation notice. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, but I felt cold inside, hollowed out by the casual efficiency with which my marriage had been dissolved. That evening, Marguerite came home long enough to pack 2 suitcases and collect some personal items. She moved through our house like a stranger, taking only what she needed and leaving behind 23 years of shared memories. "Where will you be staying?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Leonard has a guest cottage on his property. It's temporary, just until I find my own place." Of course he did. Leonard Crane, with his lakefront mansion and his fleet of luxury cars, naturally had accommodations ready for his newest acquisition. "The papers should be finalized within 2 months," I said. "Good. And Stephen, I hope you know this isn't personal. We just want different things now." I watched her load her suitcases into her BMW, noting how she avoided eye contact. "Different things," I repeated. "Right." After she drove away, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on the deck I'd built with my own hands, looking out over the lake that had drawn us to this town in the first place. The water was calm, reflecting the last light of day like a mirror. My phone buzzed with a text message from my business partner, Eddie Chen. "Heard about you and Marguerite. Sorry, man. Let me know if you need anything." News traveled fast in a town of 8,000 people. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Stephen Ashford's wife had left him for her boss, the accountant who couldn't even keep his own house in order. I finished my bourbon and went inside, already planning how I'd reorganize the space. Maybe turn Marguerite's home office into something useful, like a workshop or a library. The house was mine now, after all. Free and clear, just like she'd promised. Freedom. Such an interesting concept. I was beginning to understand that it worked both ways. 3 weeks after the papers were signed, Special Agent Dorothy Finch knocked on my door. I was in my garage, organizing tools and trying to stay busy enough to avoid thinking about how quiet the house had become. The knock was firm, professional, the kind that suggested official business rather than a social call. Agent Finch was a compact woman in her 40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her partner, Agent Martinez, stood slightly behind her, both of them wearing the kind of conservative suits that screamed federal law enforcement. "Mr. Ashford, I'm Special Agent Finch with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about your former wife's employment at Crane and Associates." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Come in. Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be appreciated, thank you." We settled in my living room, the agent sitting on the couch while I took the armchair across from them. Agent Finch pulled out a small notebook and a digital recorder. "Mr. Ashford, we're investigating potential insurance fraud involving Crane and Associates and several related companies. Your former wife's name has come up in our investigation, and we're hoping you might be able to provide some background information." "What kind of information?" "Her work responsibilities, any conversations you might have overheard about company business, that sort of thing." Agent Finch's tone was conversational, but I could sense the intensity beneath it. "We understand she recently received a promotion to Senior Vice President of Operations." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What exactly are you investigating?" Agent Martinez spoke for the first time. "We have evidence suggesting systematic inflation of insurance claims, fraudulent documentation, and money laundering through shell companies. The operation appears to have been running for several years." "And you think Marguerite is involved?" "We know she is," Agent Finch said bluntly. "Her electronic signature appears on dozens of fraudulent expense approvals and claim authorizations. What we're trying to determine is the extent of her involvement and whether she was a willing participant or simply following orders." I felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, anger, and something that might have been vindication. All those late nights, she'd claimed to be working on legitimate business deals. "She never discussed specific cases with me," I said, "but she did mention that Leonard was teaching her new approaches to claim management. She said they were finding ways to maximize client recoveries." Agent Finch made a note. "Did she ever bring work home? Documents, files, computer equipment?" "She had a home office upstairs, used it mainly for phone calls and computer work. She was very secretive about it. Said Leonard preferred to keep client information confidential." "We'd like to take a look at that office, if you don't mind." I led them upstairs to what had been Marguerite's workspace. She'd taken her computer and most of her files, but she'd left behind a filing cabinet and some paperwork. Agent Martinez began photographing documents while Agent Finch continued questioning me. "Mr. Ashford, did your wife ever discuss her compensation at Crane and Associates? Bonuses, profit sharing, anything like that?" "She mentioned performance bonuses several times, said Leonard rewarded results. Last year she received what she called a special recognition bonus of $50,000. The agents exchanged glances. "Did she say what that recognition was for?" "She said it was for developing new client relationships and improving claim processing efficiency." Agent Finch nodded grimly. "Mr. Ashford, I need to ask you directly. Did you have any knowledge of or participation in any fraudulent activities involving insurance claims?" "None whatsoever. I run a small accounting practice. I handle tax returns and bookkeeping for local businesses. Nothing related to insurance." "Good, because we're going to need your cooperation." Over the next hour, they explained the scope of their investigation. Crane and Associates had been running an elaborate scheme involving inflated property damage claims, phantom medical treatments, and staged accidents. Marguerite's role as Senior Vice President of Operations had made her responsible for approving expense reports and claim documentation that she had to have known were fraudulent. "The paper trail is extensive," Agent Martinez said, showing me photocopies of documents bearing Marguerite's signature. She authorized payments for medical treatments that never happened, property repairs that were never completed, and consulting fees to companies that don't exist. I studied the documents, recognizing my former wife's precise handwriting on several authorization forms. "How much money are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate, $3.7 million over the past 4 years," Agent Finch said. Your wife's signature is on authorizations totaling approximately 1.2 million of that. The number hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been faithfully preparing tax returns and managing small business accounts, Marguerite had been authorizing fraudulent payments worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. What do you need from me? We need you to testify about her work habits, her relationship with Leonard Crane, and any conversations you might have overheard about company business. We also need access to any financial records that might show unexplained income or expenses. I thought about the expensive clothes, the luxury spa weekends, the new BMW she'd bought last year with what she'd claimed was a performance bonus. She's been spending well beyond what her legitimate salary should have supported, I said. We noticed. The IRS is very interested in her tax returns for the past 3 years. Agent Finch closed her notebook and stood up. Mr. Ashford, I want to be clear about something. Your cooperation in this investigation is voluntary, but it's also crucial. Leonard Crane and his associates have stolen millions of dollars from insurance companies and their clients. Your testimony could help us put them away for a very long time. What happens to Marguerite? That depends on several factors. Her level of cooperation, whether she was a leader or a follower in the scheme, whether she's willing to testify against the others. Agent Finch paused. But Mr. Ashford, she's looking at serious federal charges regardless. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. She could be facing 20 years in prison. After the agents left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the business card Agent Finch had given me. The same kitchen where Marguerite had served me divorce papers just a month earlier, talking about freedom and new opportunities. I called Jim Morrison. Jim, it's Stephen. The FBI just left my house. They're investigating Marguerite and Leonard Crane for insurance fraud. Holy hell, Stephen. Are you involved? No, but they want me to testify. Apparently, Marguerite's been authorizing fraudulent claims for years. Jesus. How much money? Over $1 million with her signature on it. There was a long pause. Stephen, you need to be very careful here. If she was spending fraudulent money during your marriage, you could potentially be considered a beneficiary of criminal activity. What does that mean? It means you need to document everything. Every expensive purchase, every unexplained bonus, every time she claimed to be working late. The government might try to recover some of those funds, and you want to be able to prove you had no knowledge of the source. I spent the rest of the evening going through financial records, documenting Marguerite's spending patterns and correlating them with her claimed work bonuses. The picture that emerged was damning, a steady escalation of luxury purchases that coincided exactly with her increased responsibilities at Crane and Associates. The irony was almost too perfect. Marguerite had left me for Leonard Crane, seeking financial freedom and professional success. Instead, she'd found federal charges and the prospect of decades in prison. My phone rang at 9 o'clock. Marguerite's number appeared on the screen. Stephen, we need to talk. Her voice sounded different, smaller, frightened. The corporate confidence was gone, replaced by something approaching panic. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? The coffee shop on Main Street around 10? The FBI visited me today, Marguerite. Silence. Then, I know. That's what I need to talk to you about. I don't think that's a good idea. My attorney says, please, Stephen, I'm in serious trouble here. I need to explain what happened. I considered hanging up, but curiosity won out. 1 hour, that's all. Thank you. The line went quiet, and I sat there holding the phone, wondering what my former wife could possibly say that would explain away $1 million in fraudulent authorizations. Outside, the lake was dark and still, holding its secrets beneath the surface like everything else in this town. But secrets, I was learning, had a way of eventually floating to the top. The Main Street Coffee Company occupied a converted storefront between a used bookstore and a shop that sold handmade candles to tourists. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard by the usual crowd of retirees and freelance writers who treated the place like their personal office. Marguerite walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, and I was shocked by her appearance. The polished corporate executive I'd been married to for 23 years had been replaced by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her expensive suit was wrinkled, her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she ordered coffee from the teenage barista. She slid into the chair across from me, clutching her cup like a lifeline. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You have 1 hour." She nodded and took a shaky sip of coffee. "Stephen, I need you to understand something. I never meant for any of this to happen. When Leonard first offered me the promotion, I thought it was legitimate. I thought I was finally getting the recognition I deserved. Recognition for authorizing fraudulent insurance claims?" Her face crumpled. "I didn't know they were fraudulent. Not at first. Leonard said we were helping clients maximize their legitimate recoveries. He said insurance companies routinely underpaid claims, and we were just evening the playing field. And the $1 million in false authorizations with your signature? Those weren't false when I signed them. Leonard would bring me stacks of paperwork, tell me they'd been pre-approved by the underwriting department. He said my signature was just a formality, proof that senior management had reviewed the files." I studied her face, trying to determine if she was lying or just incredibly naive. "You never questioned why you were suddenly signing off on so many high-dollar claims?" "I asked Leonard about it once. He said it was because I was thorough, trustworthy. He said the other employees sometimes cut corners, but he could count on me to follow procedures." "What procedures, Marguerite? What procedures involve authorizing payments for medical treatments that never happened?" She flinched. "I didn't know about that. I swear to you, Stephen, I thought everything was legitimate. Leonard handled all the client contact, all the investigation work. My job was just to review his summaries and authorize payments based on his recommendations. For 4 years. Yes. And in those 4 years, you never once thought it was strange that your performance bonuses were larger than your base salary?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "I thought I was just really good at my job. Leonard kept telling me I was his most valuable employee, that I had a gift for understanding complex claims. The bonuses were supposed to be profit-sharing based on the efficiency improvements I was implementing. Efficiency improvements like authorizing fraudulent payments?" "I didn't know they were fraudulent," she repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman I'd been married to for over 2 decades. "When did you figure it out?" Another long pause. "Last week, after the FBI raided Leonard's office. They seized all the computers, all the files. Leonard called me that evening, told me we needed to get our stories straight." "And what story did he want you to tell?" "That I was just following orders, that I had no knowledge of any fraudulent activity, that I was as much a victim as anyone else." "Are you?" She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. "I don't know anymore, Stephen. I've been going through my files, trying to remember specific cases. There were so many red flags I ignored. Claims for accidents that seemed too convenient, medical reports that looked almost identical, repair estimates from contractors I'd never heard of. But you signed off on them anyway." Leonard said he'd verified everything. He said questioning approved claims would show a lack of trust in his judgment. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "What does Leonard say now?" "He's not taking my calls. His attorney contacted me yesterday and suggested I retain my own counsel because our interests might not be aligned." "Meaning he's going to throw you under the bus?" She nodded miserably. "His attorney made it clear that Leonard has evidence showing I was an enthusiastic participant in the scheme. Emails where I thanked him for the bonuses. Memos where I suggested ways to streamline the approval process." "Did you write those emails?" "Yes, but not because I knew we were committing fraud. I thought I was being a good employee, showing initiative and gratitude. I finished my coffee and checked my watch. What do you want from me, Marguerite? I want you to tell the FBI that I'm not the kind of person who would knowingly commit fraud, that I'm honest, that I've always been honest. Have you? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. She'd been lying to me for months about her relationship with Leonard, sneaking around behind my back while planning our divorce. Honesty wasn't exactly her strong suit. I never stole money from clients, if that's what you're asking. But you did steal from me. You stole years of my life while you were planning your exit strategy with Leonard. Her face hardened slightly, showing a flash of the old Marguerite. That's different, and you know it. What happened between us was personal. This is about criminal activity I didn't know I was participating in. The FBI seems to think you knew exactly what you were doing. The FBI is looking for someone to blame, and I'm an easy target. Leonard's got expensive lawyers and political connections. I'm just the employee who signed the paperwork. I stood up, suddenly tired of her self-pity. Here's what I'll tell the FBI, Marguerite. I'll tell them the truth. That you were secretive about your work, that you were spending far more money than your legitimate salary could support, and that you left me for your boss who promised you a partnership in his company. Stephen, please. I'll tell them that you were smart enough to plan and execute a divorce while hiding your relationship with Leonard. So you were certainly smart enough to know that million-dollar bonuses don't come from legitimate insurance work. She started crying then, quiet tears that streaked her makeup and made her look older than her 41 years. I'm going to prison, aren't I? Probably. For how long? Agent Finch said you could be looking at 20 years. She put her head in her hands. Oh God, what have I done? I felt a strange mix of emotions watching her break down. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to offer reassurance based on our shared history. But a larger part of me remembered the casual cruelty with which she'd dismissed our marriage, the way she'd made me feel small and unambitious while she was secretly participating in a criminal enterprise. You chose this, Marguerite. You chose Leonard, you chose the money, you chose to believe his explanations rather than asking hard questions. Now you get to live with the consequences. I left her crying in the coffee shop and walked back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. The morning was bright and clear, with a crisp autumn breeze coming off the lake. For the first time since she'd served me divorce papers, I felt like I could breathe freely. My phone rang as I was driving home. Agent Finch. Mr. Ashford, we've arrested Leonard Crane and 2 of his associates. We'd like to schedule a formal interview with you to discuss your observations about your former wife's activities. When? Would tomorrow afternoon work? Say, 2 o'clock at our field office? I'll be there. Good. And Mr. Ashford? We've obtained warrants to search Leonard Crane's properties and financial records. I think you're going to find the scope of this operation very interesting. After she hung up, I drove home through the quiet streets of our lakeside town, past the insurance office where Marguerite had thought she was building her future, past the expensive restaurants where she'd celebrated her fraudulent bonuses with Leonard. Freedom, she'd called it. Liberation from the constraints of our boring, stable marriage. She'd wanted excitement, financial success, recognition for her talents. Now she had it. Federal recognition, courtesy of the FBI. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me smile. The FBI field office was located in a nondescript building 40 minutes south of our town, sharing space with a Social Security Administration office and a passport processing center. Agent Finch met me in the lobby and led me through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room equipped with recording equipment and a table covered with file folders. Before we begin, she said, I want to thank you for your cooperation. Citizens like you make our job possible. Agent Martinez joined us, carrying a laptop and several additional folders. Mr. Ashford, we've been busy since we spoke yesterday. Leonard Crane's arrest has opened up a lot of new information. Such as? Agent Finch opened the first folder, revealing bank statements and financial records. such as the fact that your former wife received over $400,000 in fraudulent bonuses over the past 3 years, money that came directly from inflated insurance claims. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. 400,000? Plus her legitimate salary, plus benefits, plus what Leonard called performance incentives for bringing in new business. Agent Martinez pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. She was making more money than the mayor. New business? Clients who needed help maximizing their insurance recoveries. Your wife was very good at identifying potential targets, people who'd suffered legitimate losses but might be willing to inflate their claims if someone showed them how. The picture was getting clearer and uglier by the minute. She was recruiting clients for the fraud scheme. Among other things, Leonard Crane kept detailed records, including recordings of phone conversations and copies of emails. Your wife was much more involved than she claimed yesterday. Agent Finch activated the recording equipment. This is Special Agent Dorothy Finch, case number 2023-4471, interviewing Stephen Ashford regarding insurance fraud activities at Crane & Associates. Mr. Ashford, you've been advised that this interview is voluntary and that you're free to leave at any time. I understand. Let's start with your observations about your wife's work schedule. When did you first notice changes in her routine? I thought back, trying to pinpoint when Marguerite's behavior had shifted. About 3 years ago, she started working later and traveling more. She said Leonard was giving her additional responsibilities, training her for senior management. Did she discuss specific clients or cases? Sometimes. She mentioned helping a family who'd lost their home in a fire, getting them a settlement that was much larger than they'd expected. She seemed proud of her work, said she was making a real difference in people's lives. Agent Martinez made notes while I talked. Did she ever bring clients to your home? Once or twice, usually for dinner parties that Leonard organized. He liked to entertain potential clients in informal settings, make them feel comfortable. Do you remember any names? I provided what I could remember: the Hendersons, who'd claimed extensive water damage from a burst pipe; the Kowalskis, whose car accident had somehow resulted in 6-figure medical settlements for relatively minor injuries; the Yamadas, whose small kitchen fire had turned into a total home renovation paid for by insurance. All of those cases are part of our investigation, Agent Finch said grimly. The Henderson water damage claim included payments for repairs that were never completed. The Kowalski medical treatments were largely fictional. The Yamada fire damage was inflated by approximately 300%. And Marguerite knew this? Agent Martinez turned his laptop screen toward me. This is an email your wife sent to Leonard Crane 6 months ago. I read the message, feeling my stomach turn. Leonard, the Yamada claim is perfect for our purposes. Small, legitimate fire, motivated clients, cooperative contractor willing to provide inflated estimates. I can authorize up to $200K without additional oversight. Let's move quickly on this one. M. She knew, I said quietly. She knew, she planned, and she profited. Agent Finch pulled out another document. This is a bonus calculation sheet in Leonard's handwriting. Your wife received a 5% commission on every fraudulent dollar she authorized. The math was simple and damning. Marguerite hadn't just been following orders, she'd been getting rich from other people's misery. Mr. Ashford, we need to discuss your financial situation during this period. Did you benefit from your wife's illegal income? I'd been dreading this question since our first meeting. She paid for some household expenses and personal items with money I thought came from legitimate bonuses. I had no knowledge of the source. We understand that, but we need to document everything to determine what assets might be subject to forfeiture. Over the next 2 hours, we went through my financial records in detail. The expensive renovation Marguerite had insisted on for our master bathroom. The luxury vacation to Europe she'd surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. The new furniture, the artwork, the wine collection she'd been building. Conservative estimate, Agent Martinez said. You received approximately $60,000 in benefits from fraudulent proceeds. What does that mean for me? It means you'll need to cooperate fully with asset recovery, Agent Finch said. The government will likely seek to recover some of those funds, but your cooperation in this investigation will be taken into account. They showed me more evidence. Recorded phone calls where Marguerite discussed claim strategies with Leonard, photographs of her celebrating large settlements at expensive restaurants, bank records showing cash deposits that didn't match her reported income. The case against your former wife is airtight, Agent Finch said. She's facing multiple felony charges, and the evidence of her active participation is overwhelming. What happens next? We'll be arresting her tomorrow morning. Her attorney has been notified that she needs to surrender herself by 9 a.m. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, satisfaction, sadness, and something that might have been relief. Will she cooperate? That's up to her. If she provides substantial assistance in prosecuting Leonard Crane and the others, it might reduce her sentence. But she's looking at significant prison time regardless. Agent Martinez closed his laptop. Mr. Ashford, we may need you to testify at trial. Are you prepared to do that? Yes. Even though it means testifying against your former wife? I thought about the question seriously. A month ago, I might have hesitated, might have felt some loyalty to the woman I'd been married to for over 2 decades. But that woman had been a fiction, a carefully constructed facade, hiding someone I'd never really known. She made her choices, I said. I'm prepared to tell the truth about what I observed. The drive home gave me time to process everything I'd learned. Marguerite hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been a criminal, using our marriage as cover while she participated in a scheme that had stolen millions from insurance companies and their customers. The house felt different when I walked in, cleaner somehow, as if her absence had purged it of something toxic. I poured myself a bourbon and sat on the deck, watching the sun set over the lake. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Marguerite. I know what's happening tomorrow. I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Sorry wasn't going to help the families who'd been victimized by her scheme. Sorry wasn't going to undo 3 years of lies and fraud. But sorry was a start. The next morning, I watched the local news coverage of Marguerite's arrest. She looked small and frightened as federal agents led her away from Leonard's guest cottage in handcuffs, her expensive clothes wrinkled and her corporate confidence completely gone. The reporter mentioned that she was facing up to 20 years in federal prison on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Leonard Crane had already been denied bail and was being held pending trial. I turned off the television and made myself breakfast, enjoying the quiet of my house and the knowledge that, for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood. The freedom Marguerite had sought had become a prison. The liberation she'd promised herself had turned into federal charges and public humiliation. Sometimes justice had a sense of irony. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse wearing my best suit and trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my stomach. The prosecution had called me as their final witness in the case against Marguerite and Leonard Crane, and I knew my testimony would help determine how long my former wife would spend in prison. Assistant U.S. Attorney Harold Vance had prepared me thoroughly for this moment. A tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair and the focused intensity of someone who'd built his career prosecuting white-collar criminals, he'd spent hours walking me through the questions he'd ask and the evidence he'd present. Remember, he'd told me during our final preparation session, stick to what you observe directly. Don't speculate, don't interpret, just tell the jury what you saw and heard. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims of the fraud scheme, and curious locals who'd followed the case in the newspapers. Marguerite sat at the defense table wearing a conservative blue suit, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Leonard Crane occupied the other defense table, his expensive attorney whispering in his ear while he stared straight ahead with the blank expression of someone trying to project innocence. "The government calls Stephen Ashford," Harold Vance announced. I walked to the witness stand, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The bailiff's words echoed in the high-ceilinged courtroom. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Harold Vance approached the witness stand with a folder full of documents. "Mr. Ashford, please state your name and occupation for the record." "Stephen Ashford. I'm a certified public accountant. I own Ashford Accounting Services here in town." "Mr. Ashford, how long were you married to the defendant Marguerite Ashford?" 23 years. We divorced 8 months ago." "During the final 3 years of your marriage, did you notice any changes in your wife's work habits or financial situation?" I looked directly at the jury, 12 ordinary people who would decide Marguerite's fate. "Yes, she began working much longer hours, traveling frequently, and spending significantly more money than her legitimate salary could support." "Can you give the jury some specific examples?" "She renovated our master bathroom at a cost of $35,000 paid in cash. She bought expensive jewelry, took luxury vacations, and purchased a new BMW. When I asked about the money, she said Leonard Crane was giving her performance bonuses for exceptional work." Harold Vance introduced evidence, receipts, bank statements, photographs of the renovations and purchases. "Mr. Ashford, did your wife discuss her work responsibilities with you?" "Sometimes. She said Leonard was training her to identify clients who weren't receiving fair treatment from their insurance companies. She seemed proud of her ability to help people get larger settlements." "Did she ever mention specific cases?" I testified about the dinner parties, the client meetings at our home, the conversations where Marguerite had boasted about helping families receive settlements that were much larger than they'd initially expected. "Mr. Ashford, did your wife ever express any concerns about the legitimacy of these large settlements?" "Never. She always presented her work as helping victims get what they deserved from insurance companies that were trying to underpay claims." Harold Vance showed me copies of emails and documents. "Do you recognize your wife's handwriting and signature on these authorizations?" I studied the papers, recognizing Marguerite's precise handwriting on forms authorizing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent payments. "Yes, that's her signature and handwriting." "Mr. Ashford, based on your 23 years of marriage to the defendant, would you describe her as someone who pays attention to details in financial matters?" Marguerite's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the question. "Yes. Marguerite was extremely detail-oriented about money. She balanced our checkbook to the penny, questioned every expense, and researched every major purchase thoroughly. She wasn't someone who would sign documents without understanding what they contained." The cross-examination was brutal. Marguerite's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman from a prestigious firm, tried to portray me as a bitter ex-husband seeking revenge. "Mr. Ashford, isn't it true that you were angry about your wife's affair with Leonard Crane?" "I was disappointed by her infidelity, yes. Disappointed enough to cooperate with federal agents in building a case against her. I cooperated with federal agents because they asked me to tell the truth about what I'd observed. My personal feelings about the divorce were irrelevant." "But you did have personal feelings, didn't you? You felt abandoned, rejected, replaced by a wealthier, more successful man?" Harold Vance objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The defense attorney was trying to make the jury see me as vindictive rather than truthful. "Mr. Ashford, did you ever directly witness your former wife knowingly authorizing a fraudulent insurance claim?" "No, I didn't work at Crane & Associates. So your testimony is based entirely on assumptions and speculation about activities you never directly observed?" "My testimony is based on what my wife told me about her work and what I observed about her spending patterns and behavior." "But you never saw her commit fraud, did you?" "I saw her spend money that came from fraudulent activities, whether she acknowledged the source or not." The attorney pressed harder, trying to get me to admit bias or uncertainty, but I stuck to the facts. Marguerite had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in unexplained bonuses. She had signed documents authorizing payments for fraudulent claims. She had recruited clients for the scheme and celebrated large settlements that were later proven to be inflated. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt drained but satisfied. I'd told the truth, completely and without embellishment. The trial continued for another week. Leonard Crane's defense team tried to portray him as a legitimate businessman who'd been deceived by subordinates. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, email communications, and financial records painted a clear picture of a man who'd orchestrated a sophisticated fraud scheme over several years. Marguerite's defense was more nuanced. Her attorney argued that she'd been manipulated by Leonard, that she'd trusted his explanations and followed his instructions without understanding the criminal nature of their activities. But the prosecution's evidence was devastating. Email communications showed Marguerite actively planning fraudulent claims, calculating her commission percentages, and recruiting new clients for the scheme. Her signatures appeared on hundreds of documents authorizing payments she had to have known were fraudulent. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Leonard Crane received 25 years in federal prison. His assets were seized, his business was dissolved, and he was ordered to pay full restitution to the victims of his scheme. Marguerite received 12 years, with the possibility of parole after serving 85% of her sentence. The judge noted her cooperation with the investigation, but emphasized that her active participation in the fraud scheme warranted significant punishment. I watched from the gallery as she was led away in handcuffs, her expensive attorney gathering papers while promising to file an appeal. She looked back once, catching my eye across the crowded courtroom. I saw no anger there, no blame, just acceptance of the consequences she'd brought on herself. Outside the courthouse, Harold Vance shook my hand and thanked me for my cooperation. "Justice isn't always satisfying," he said, "but it's necessary. Your testimony helped ensure that the victims of this scheme received some measure of justice." I drove home through the quiet streets of our lakeside town, past the empty offices of Crane and Associates and the coffee shop where Marguerite had tried to explain her actions. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. That evening, I sat on my deck with a glass of bourbon, watching the sun set over the lake. My phone rang, a call from my daughter in college, checking in and asking about the trial. "I saw the news coverage, Dad. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. I'm sorry about Mom. I know this has been hard for you. Your mother made her choices. Now she has to live with the consequences." After we hung up, I remained on the deck as darkness settled over the water. The house behind me was quiet and clean, free from the toxic atmosphere that had poisoned the final years of my marriage. Marguerite had wanted freedom from our boring, stable life. She'd wanted excitement, recognition, and financial success. She'd found all three, along with federal charges and a 12-year prison sentence. Sometimes the universe had a perfect sense of timing. Her freedom had indeed come with a court date, just as the FBI had promised. The liberation she'd sought had required formal dissolution, not just of our marriage, but of her entire carefully constructed life. I finished my bourbon and went inside, already planning how I'd spend the years ahead. The house was mine, the business was thriving, and for the first time in decades, I was answerable only to myself. Freedom, it turned out, worked both ways.